The photograph sits on my desk, now yellowed at the edges like an old wound. 4 people smiling at the camera, a perfect American family from 1954. Dad's arm around Mom's shoulders, his other hand resting on my 14-year-old head. Lily, barely 10, clutches a stuffed rabbit against her chest, her gap-toothed grin innocent and trusting. I remember the photographer's words, "Beautiful family. Hold that pose." If only he could have seen what happened after the camera clicked, after the neighbors went home, after the darkness crept into our house, like fog rolling off Lake Michigan. People in town called Dad a pillar of the community. Harold Brennan, successful insurance salesman deacon at St. Mary's volunteer fire chief. They saw his firm handshakes at church socials, heard his booming laugh at town council meetings. What they didn't see were his hands in places they should never have been, his breath hot against my ear, whispering threats disguised as affection. The nightmare began 3 months before that photograph on a Tuesday night, when Mom worked late at the telephone company. I was sketching in my room, horses, mostly wild ones, running free across endless plains. Dad knocked, then entered without waiting. His presence filled the doorway like storm clouds gathering. "Pretty picture, sweetheart," he said, sitting heavily on my bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, and I felt the heat radiating from his body. "You're growing up so fast." Something in his voice made my pencil freeze against the paper. The way his eyes moved over me, calculating and hungry, like a predator sizing up prey. I told myself I was imagining things. Good fathers admired their daughters' artwork. Good fathers were proud of how their girls were maturing. But good fathers didn't let their hands wander. Good fathers didn't make their daughters feel dirty and small and afraid to breathe. A spark ignited in my chest that night, barely noticeable, like the first ember of what would become a consuming blaze. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny flame would grow in the shadows, feeding on secrets and rage, until it became something powerful enough to burn down everything Harold Brennan had built. Our house on Elm Street was the envy of Millbrook Township. White picket fence, rose bushes that Mom tended religiously, a wraparound porch, where Dad would sit evenings waving to neighbors like a benevolent king surveying his domain. Inside, hardwood floors gleamed under Mom's careful polishing, and the smell of her pot roast filled Sunday afternoons with warmth and belonging. "Emma, set the table, honey," Mom called from the kitchen one crisp October evening. "Your father will be home any minute." I arranged the good china, the blue and white set Mom had inherited from her grandmother, while Lily carefully folded napkins into triangles the way Mom had taught her. The dining room felt cozy in the lamplight shadows dancing on the wallpaper decorated with tiny roses. Dad burst through the front door right on schedule, briefcase in one hand, evening paper in the other. "There are my 3 beautiful girls." He swept Mom into a theatrical kiss that made her giggle, then ruffled Lily's curls. When he reached me, his hand lingered on my shoulder just a moment too long, his thumb tracing a small circle against my collarbone. "How was your day, Princess? Learn anything interesting at school?" "Just the usual," I said, stepping away to pour water into glasses. My skin still tingled where he'd touched it, but not in a pleasant way. "Emma's art teacher says she has real talent," Mom announced proudly as we settled around the table. "She wants to enter one of Emma's drawings in the county fair competition." "Is that so?" Dad's eyes found mine across the table. "My talented daughter. You get that artistic eye from me, you know. I've always been good at appreciating beauty." The way he said it made something cold settle in my stomach, but Mom and Lily beamed at the compliment. "Tell us about your day, Harold," Mom said, passing the mashed potatoes. "Any interesting claims?" Dad launched into his usual repertoire of workplace stories, his voice animated and charming. He had a gift for making even insurance sound exciting, painting his clients as colorful characters in an ongoing drama. Mrs. Patterson's fender bender became a tale of romantic intrigue. Old Mr. Johnson's barn fire turned into an adventure story complete with heroic rescue attempts. But even as I laughed at his jokes and played the part of the dutiful daughter, I noticed things others missed. The way his gaze kept drifting to the neckline of my blouse. How he found excuses to reach across the table, his arm brushing against mine. The smile that didn't quite reach his eyes when he looked at me. "Emma's been helping me with my arithmetic," Lily piped up, stabbing a green bean with her fork. "She's the best teacher ever, better than Miss Murphy." "I'm sure she is," Dad said softly. "Emma's always been good at showing people exactly what they need to know." Mom missed the undercurrent in his voice, but something in my chest tightened like a fist. After dinner, Dad retreated to his study to catch up on paperwork, but I caught him watching me through the doorway as I dried dishes, his gaze heavy and expectant. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time. Sarah Henderson was my best friend and the person I trusted most in the world. She lived 2 houses down in a yellow cottage with green shutters, and we'd been inseparable since first grade. Where I was serious and observant, Sarah was bubbly and optimistic, always ready with a joke or a wild plan for adventure. "You've been acting weird lately," she announced one afternoon as we walked home from school together. October leaves crunched under our feet and the air smelled of wood smoke and apple cider. "Weirder than usual, I mean." I kicked at a pile of leaves, sending them scattering across the sidewalk. "I'm fine, just thinking about stuff." "What kind of stuff?" Sarah stopped walking and grabbed my arm, forcing me to look at her. Her freckled face was creased with concern. "Come on, Em. We tell each other everything. What's going on?" For a moment, I considered telling her about the strange looks, the lingering touches, the way Dad's presence had started to feel suffocating. But how could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? How could I voice suspicions that might be nothing more than my overactive imagination? "It's probably nothing," I said finally. "Just growing pains, I guess." Sarah studied my face with those sharp green eyes that seemed to see everything. "Emma Marie Brennan, you're lying to me. I can always tell when you're lying because you get that little line between your eyebrows." I reached up to smooth the worried crease she was talking about. "I'm not lying. I'm just confused about some things. Family stuff." "What kind of family stuff?" The question hung in the air between us. A few houses away, I could see our front porch where Dad was probably settling into his evening routine, reading the paper and smoking his pipe. From this distance, he looked like any other father enjoying a peaceful evening. The picture of respectability. "Nothing I can really talk about," I said quietly. "Not yet." Sarah's expression softened. She'd known me long enough to understand when to push and when to back away. "Okay, but promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if whatever's bothering you gets too big to handle alone, you'll come to me. Even if it's scary or embarrassing, or you think I won't understand." "Promise." I looked at my best friend's earnest face and felt tears prick at my eyes. "I promise." But even as I said the words, I wondered if it was a promise I'd be able to keep. The storm that changed everything arrived on November 15th, 1954. Mom had been called to work an emergency shift telephone lines down across 3 counties operators needed until dawn. She kissed us goodbye in the kitchen, her coat already buttoned against the wind howling outside. "Be good for your father," she said, smoothing Lily's hair with gentle fingers. "I'll make pancakes when I get home tomorrow morning." Dad stood in the doorway watching as her headlights disappeared into the swirling darkness. When he turned back to us, I saw something different in his expression. The careful mask he wore for the outside world had slipped, revealing something predatory and patient beneath. "Early bedtime tonight, girls. This storm's got me jumpy." We climbed the stairs together, Lily chattering nervously about the thunder that shook the windows. I stayed silent, hyper-aware of Dad's presence behind us, the weight of his gaze on my back. He tucked Lily in first, his goodnight kiss lasting longer than usual, his hand stroking her cheek with a tenderness that somehow felt wrong. In my own room, I changed into my nightgown and climbed under the quilts Mom had sewn by hand. The fabric smelled like lavender sachets and safety scents that would soon be poisoned by memory. I was nearly asleep when my door opened with a soft creak. Dad stood silhouetted against the hallway light, still fully dressed. "Can't sleep with all this noise," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. The click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the storm's temporary quiet. The mattress sagged as he sat on the edge of my bed. "You're becoming such a beautiful young woman, Emma. Sometimes I look at you, and I can hardly believe you're mine." His hand found my shoulder through the thin cotton of my nightgown. The touch was gentle at first, almost fatherly. But then it began to move tracing patterns that made my skin crawl with wrongness. "Daddy loves you so much, Princess. More than anyone else in the world. You know that, don't you?" I tried to speak to ask him what he was doing, but my voice seemed trapped in my throat. This was my father. He was supposed to protect me, not this. The touch became pressure, and pressure became violation. His other hand covered my mouth before I could scream, muffling the sobs that tried to escape. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "This is how special families show love, Emma. But it's our secret just between us. If you tell anyone at all, they won't understand. They'll think you're a bad girl who seduced her own father. They'll take you away from Mommy and Lily, lock you up somewhere terrible, and it will be all your fault." The next 20 minutes felt like drowning in slow motion. When it was over, Dad smoothed my hair and kissed my forehead as if he'd simply read me a bedtime story. "Sweet dreams, Princess. Remember, this stays in our family. That's how much Daddy trusts you." I lay in the dark, long after his footsteps faded, my body aching in places that had names I didn't want to know. The storm continued its assault on the house rain, lashing the windows like tears I was too shocked to cry. The real horror came 3 days later. I was making sandwiches for lunch when Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving with a careful, brittle precision that made my stomach drop. Her usual bounce was gone, replaced by the hesitant shuffle of someone trying not to jar injured parts. "Lily, are you feeling okay?" She nodded too quickly, but wouldn't meet my eyes. As she reached for her glass of milk, I saw them small, purple bruises circling her thin wrist, like a bracelet of pain, a scratch on her neck that she'd tried to hide with the collar of her dress. "Honey, where did these marks come from?" "I fell," she whispered, her voice shaking like leaves in wind. "Playing outside yesterday. I fell down hard." The lie hit me like a physical blow, because I recognized it the same desperate story I'd been telling myself for days. I knelt beside her chair and gently lifted her chin, forcing her to look at me. What I saw in her eyes confirmed my worst fears. The glassy shock, the careful blankness of someone trying to hide unbearable pain. The premature aging that comes from learning too young that the people who should protect you can be the ones who hurt you most. He'd taken her too. My baby sister, innocent, trusting Lily who collected pressed flowers and believed the world was fundamentally good, had been dragged into the same nightmare that haunted my sleep. The ember in my chest roared to life, no longer a spark, but a flame that threatened to consume everything. In that moment, staring at my broken little sister, the scared girl I'd been died, and something harder took her place. Harold Brennan had made a critical mistake. He'd hurt the one person I would kill to protect, and now he would learn exactly what kind of enemy he'd created. I waited until the next morning to approach Mom, timing my approach for when Dad had left for work and Lily was safely at school. Mom stood at the kitchen sink, washing breakfast dishes, humming an old radio tune under her breath. Sunlight streamed through the gingham curtains she'd sewn herself, painting everything in deceptively cheerful yellow light. "Mom, I need to tell you something important." She glanced over her shoulder, soap bubbles clinging to her hands. "What is it, sweetheart? You look serious." The phrases I had practiced seemed awkward when I spoke them. It concerns our father. He has been making inappropriate physical contact with me, and now he's doing the same thing to Lily." The dish slipped from her hands, shattering against the porcelain sink with a sharp crack. She stared at the broken pieces for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Then the explosion came. "Emma Catherine Brennan." Her voice rose to a shriek that made me step backward. "How dare you say such a vile, disgusting thing about your father?" Water dripped from her trembling hands as she whirled to face me. "Your father is a good man, the best man I know. He works himself to the bone providing for this family, and this is how you repay him, with filthy lies." "Mom, please just listen." "No!" She slammed her palm against the counter hard enough to rattle the remaining dishes. "I will not listen to another word of this sick fantasy. You're 15 years old, Emma. Old enough to know the difference between appropriate affection and whatever twisted ideas you've gotten into your head." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her eyes blazed with something that looked dangerously like hatred. "I don't know what's gotten into you lately. Maybe it's those romance novels you read filling your mind with inappropriate thoughts. Maybe it's that friend of yours with her wild stories about older boys." She grabbed a dish towel and began scrubbing at invisible stains on the counter. "Your father adores you girls. He would cut off his own hands before he'd hurt either of you. The fact that you could even think such a horrible thing." Her voice broke. "It makes me physically ill." But I caught something else in her reaction, a flash of panic that seemed disproportionate to simple disbelief. When I'd mentioned the touching, her face had gone white in a way that suggested recognition rather than shock, as if some buried part of her knew exactly what I was talking about. I saw the bruises on Lily's wrists. I pressed desperate to make her understand. "She's walking differently, Mom. She's afraid." "Lily is a clumsy child who plays too rough with the neighborhood boys," Mom snapped. "If you keep filling her head with these sick ideas, you'll traumatize her for life." The kitchen fell silent except for her ragged breathing. When she finally looked at me again, her expression had hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. "You will never speak of this again. Do you understand me? Never. If I hear you spreading these lies to anyone at all, I will send you away to a boarding school where they know how to handle disturbed girls." She straightened her apron with shaking hands. "Now, go to school. And Emma, if you care about this family at all, you'll forget this conversation ever happened." At school, I moved through my classes like a sleepwalker. During lunch, Sarah tried repeatedly to draw me into conversation, but her voice seemed to come from another world. "The Halloween dance is only 2 weeks away," she chattered, unwrapping her sandwich. "Bobby Morrison asked me, can you believe it? I thought he didn't even know I existed." I stared at my untouched lunch, my mother's rejection echoing in my ears. "Emma." Sarah's voice sharpened with concern. "You haven't heard a word I've said, have you?" I looked up to find her studying me with those perceptive green eyes. "Sorry, I'm just distracted by what you've been acting strange for weeks now. Distant, like you're carrying around some huge secret." She leaned forward. "Is it a boy? Are you seeing someone your parents don't approve of?" The irony of her guess made me want to laugh or scream, or both. "It's not a boy." "Then what, come on 'em? We've been best friends since we were 6. I can tell when something's eating you alive." I opened my mouth to tell her everything about Dad's night visits, about Lily's bruises, about Mom's terrifying refusal to believe us. Sarah was smart and practical. She'd know what to do. But then I heard Dad's voice in my memory. "They'll think you're a bad girl who seduced her own father." "It's nothing," I lied. "Just family stuff. You know how parents can be." Sarah's expression told me she didn't believe a word of it, but she let it go. "Okay, but Emma, whatever's going on, you don't have to handle it alone. That's what friends are for." That afternoon, I found Lily in her room coloring with unusual intensity. Her tongue poked out in concentration as she filled in the outline of a house, but instead of bright, cheerful colors, she was using black and gray, turning the happy home into something dark and foreboding. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" She looked up with startled eyes, quickly covering the picture with her arm. "Nothing, just a house." I sat on the edge of her bed close enough to see the tremor in her small hands. "Lily, if someone was hurting you, you'd tell me right. Even if they said you weren't supposed to." Her coloring stopped completely. Without lifting her head, she whispered, "Daddy says good girls don't tell family secrets. He says if I tell secrets, bad things happen to little girls who can't keep their mouths shut." The crayon snapped between her fingers. She stared at the broken pieces as if they represented something much larger. "What kind of bad things?" I asked gently. "They send you away to places where nobody loves you, where mean people do worse things than what happens here." Her voice was barely audible. "And it's all your fault because you couldn't keep the secret safe." I pulled her into my arms, feeling her bird-thin body shake against mine. This was beyond my mother's denial or my own fear. This was my little sister being systematically destroyed by the one person who should have protected her above all others. That night, as I lay awake listening for Dad's footsteps in the hallway, I made a decision. If the adults in our world wouldn't help us, I'd have to help us myself. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way to gather proof, to make people listen, to stop him from hurting us ever again. The spark in my chest had become a steady flame, and soon it would become an inferno that would consume Harold Brennan's carefully constructed world. November blended into December, with unusual cruelty, winter arriving early and harsh. Blizzards trapped our family inside the house for days at a time, making escape impossible, and Dad's attention more focused than ever. I became expert at reading the warning signs, the way his eyes would linger, the subtle changes in his voice, the restless energy that meant he was planning something. I developed an elaborate system of interference. When I saw him watching Lily too intently, I'd suddenly remember homework that required his help, or I'd spill something that needed immediate cleanup. I taught Lily to wedge a chair under her doorknob and showed her how to make it look accidental if Mom discovered it. But I couldn't be everywhere at once. One gray December morning, I found Lily sitting on her bedroom floor, trying to clean blood from her nightgown with a damp washcloth. Her movements were clumsy and desperate, like someone trying to erase evidence of a crime. "Oh, honey." The words escaped as a broken whisper. She looked up at me with eyes decades too old for her 10-year-old face. "I couldn't make it stop bleeding, Emma. I tried, but it just kept." I knelt beside her and gently took the stained fabric from her shaking hands. The evidence of Dad's escalating violence made bile rise in my throat, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "Let me help you clean up, then we'll get you into fresh clothes." As I helped her wash and dress, Lily began talking in the flat, disconnected voice that frightened me more than screaming would have. "He said it's because I'm getting to be such a pretty little girl. He said pretty girls have to learn special lessons that other children don't understand." She stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. "Am I pretty, Emma? Is that why this happens?" "No, baby. This happens because he's sick, not because of anything you did or didn't do. You're perfect, exactly as you are." But I could see the poison taking root in her mind, the way Dad's twisted logic was becoming her reality. Every day, she grew quieter, more withdrawn. She'd stopped humming while she colored. She flinched when anyone touched her, even me. At school, my grades began slipping as exhaustion and hypervigilance took their toll. I'd fall asleep in class after lying awake all night listening for footsteps, then jolt awake at the slightest sound. My art teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed the change in my drawings. They'd become darker, more violent, filled with shadows and trapped figures. The school counselor, Mrs. Patterson, called me to her office in early January. "Emma, your teachers are concerned about you. Your grades have dropped significantly. You seem distracted in class, and frankly, you look like you haven't slept in weeks. I sat rigidly in the chair across from her desk. My hands folded so tightly, my knuckles showed white. I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson, just tired. She leaned forward, her gray eyes kind but persistent. Tired from what? Is everything all right at home? The question hung between us like a bridge I was too afraid to cross. Mrs. Patterson had a reputation for actually listening to students for taking their problems seriously. This was my chance, maybe my only chance to get help from an adult who might believe me. But Dad's threats echoed in my mind. They'll think you're lying for attention. They'll split up our family and send you somewhere worse. Everything's fine, I heard myself say. Just normal teenage stuff. Mrs. Patterson studied my face with uncomfortable intensity. Emma, I want you to know that if you ever need someone to talk to about anything, no matter how difficult or frightening, my door is always open. Sometimes problems that seem impossible to solve become manageable when we share them with the right person. I nodded and escaped back to algebra class, but the conversation haunted me. How close I'd come to speaking the truth, and how terrified I'd been to actually do it. Sarah cornered me after school that same day, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by determined concern. Okay, that's enough, she said, blocking my path to the school bus. We're going to my house, and you're going to tell me what's really going on. Sarah, I can't. Yes, you can. Her voice was firm but gentle. Emma, I've been your best friend for almost 10 years. I know you better than anyone except maybe your sister. And I know when you're in trouble. We walked to her house in silence, our breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The Henderson home felt like a sanctuary, warm, cheerful, filled with the comfortable chaos of a normal family. Sarah's mom was baking cookies, her little brother was practicing piano, and her father was reading the newspaper by the fireplace. In Sarah's room, surrounded by her collection of horse figurines and movie star posters, I felt the weight of my secret pressing against my ribs like a physical thing. Talk to me, Sarah said quietly, settling cross-legged on her bed. Please. I sat in her desk chair, staring at my hands. If I tell you something, do you promise you won't tell anyone? Not your parents. Not anyone. Of course, you know you can trust me. The words came out in a rush, disjointed and desperate. My dad has been doing things. To me, and now to Lily. Things fathers aren't supposed to do. Sarah's face went very still. What kind of things? I couldn't say the words directly, but I described enough for her to understand. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror to a fierce anger that reminded me she had 2 younger sisters of her own. Emma, that's rape. You know that, right? What he's doing is called rape, and it's a crime. Hearing the word spoken aloud made something crack inside my chest. I tried to tell my mom, but she wouldn't listen. She got angry and said I was making it up. Then we tell someone else. We tell my parents, or Mrs. Patterson, or Sui no. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Sarah, you don't understand. He's Harold Brennan. Everyone in this town thinks he's wonderful. Who's going to believe 2 teenage girls over him? Sarah stood up and began pacing her small room, her mind clearly racing. There has to be something we can do. Some way to prove what he's doing. Like what? She stopped pacing and looked at me with sudden intensity. Evidence. We need evidence that even adults can't ignore. That evening, Sarah walked me home chattering loudly about homework and weekend plans while secretly pressing something into my palm. Back in my room, I discovered it was a small recording device her older brother used for band practice, along with a note, "Hide this somewhere he won't find it. Get him talking about what he does. We'll figure out the rest together. S." I stared at the tiny machine, feeling hope and terror war in my chest. Sarah believed me. More than that, she was willing to help me fight back. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel completely alone. But as winter deepened and Dad's assaults became more frequent and violent, I wondered if even the best evidence would be enough to bring down a man who had spent decades building his reputation as the perfect father and community leader. The flame inside me burned brighter with each passing day, fed by rage and determination, and the growing certainty that Harold Brennan's reign of terror was going to end. The only question was whether Lily and I would survive long enough to see justice done. February brought a thaw that turned the streets into rivers of slush and awakened something reckless in my father. With Mom working even longer hours to cover for an operator who'd quit without notice, Dad's nighttime visits became brazen, almost casual in their brutality. On February 14th, a Valentine's Day, I would never forget I finally managed to capture what I needed. I'd hidden Sarah's brother's recording device inside my bookshelf, positioned behind a row of Nancy Drew mysteries where it could pick up audio from anywhere in the room. My hands shook as I pretended to read while waiting for Dad to make his inevitable appearance. He entered without knocking, carrying a small wrapped box that made my skin crawl. "Happy Valentine's Day, Princess," he said, settling on my bed with the casual confidence of someone who believed he owned everything in the room. "I brought you something special." Inside the box was a delicate gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a thoughtful gift from a loving father. In our twisted reality, it felt like a collar. "It's beautiful." I managed my voice steady, despite the terror clawing at my throat. Just like you." His hand moved to stroke my hair, and I forced myself not to flinch away. The recording device was capturing every word, every sound. "You're becoming such a perfect young woman, so obedient, so understanding of how special families show love." For the next 30 minutes, he talked, while he violated me, describing in graphic detail what he was doing and why I should be grateful for his attention. His voice was different that night, more confident, more explicitly threatening. As if he'd finally stopped pretending this was about love and embraced the reality of what he was, a predator who enjoyed his power over helpless victims. "Your mother was just like you at your age," he whispered against my ear. Confused about family love at first, but she learned, just like her mother learned before her. "It's tradition, Emma. A beautiful tradition that makes our family special." The words hit me like ice water. He was talking about more than just our immediate family. He was describing a pattern that stretched back generations. But it was what he said next that would haunt my dreams for months to come. "I'm going to teach Lily everything I taught you. And someday, when you have daughters of your own, you'll understand how precious this gift really is. The gift of perfect family love." When he finally left me broken and bleeding, I lay in the dark, clutching the knowledge that this wasn't just abuse, it was a carefully maintained family tradition that he planned to continue through our children and grandchildren. The scope of the horror was breathtaking, but I also had what I'd been seeking: undeniable proof of his crimes recorded in his own voice. The next morning, while Dad was at work and Lily was at school, I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The space was dusty and cold, filled with boxes of old clothes and forgotten Christmas decorations. I was looking for anything that might help me understand the full extent of what we were dealing with. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about our family. Hidden behind a stack of moth-eaten quilts was a small wooden trunk secured with a brass lock. The wood was old but well-maintained, as if someone had cared for it despite keeping it hidden. I forced the lock with a screwdriver from Dad's toolbox, my heart hammering as the lid creaked open. Inside were letters, photographs, and a leather-bound journal written in Mom's careful handwriting. The dates went back to 1936, 3 years before my birth, when she was 19 and newly married. The first entry made my blood run cold. "Harold is so patient with my fears about intimacy. He says what happened between Father and me wasn't wrong. I just didn't understand it properly because I was too young to appreciate the beauty of complete family love. He's helping me see that physical affection within families is natural, even sacred. I'm so lucky to have found someone who truly understands what I've been through." Page after page revealed the horrifying truth. Mom hadn't just been a victim of childhood abuse, she'd been systematically convinced by Harold that her trauma was actually a blessing. He'd spent years rewriting her memories, transforming violation into love, pain into privilege. One passage dated just before my birth was particularly devastating. I understand now why Harold wanted to wait before having children. He needed to make sure I was strong enough to support our daughters through the same beautiful awakening I experienced. When Emma is old enough, Harold will help her understand the special bonds that make our family different from others. It's not abuse, it's love so pure that the outside world could never comprehend it. I sat in the freezing attic, surrounded by the detritus of our family's history, and felt the final piece of a horrible puzzle click into place. This wasn't one sick man preying on his daughters. This was a multi-generational pattern of abuse polished and refined over decades. Dad had deliberately sought out a victim who was already conditioned to accept violation as love, then spent years convincing her that what happened to her was sacred tradition rather than criminal assault. But the discovery also gave me something I hadn't possessed before: insight into his methodology. I could see exactly how he manipulated people, how he twisted reality, until victims became accomplices. For the first time, I understood not just what he was doing, but how he was doing it, and more importantly, how it could be stopped. That evening, I waited for Mom to come home from her late shift. She found me sitting at the kitchen table, with the journal open between us, the recording device beside it. Her face went white when she saw what I held. "Emma, where did you get that?" "The attic." I pressed play, and Dad's voice filled the kitchen, his description of what he'd done to me the night before, his casual threats, his detailed plans for Lily's future. Mom's hands flew to cover her mouth, but I kept the recording playing. "This is what family love sounds like, Mom." She sank into the chair across from me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't understand. It's not. He doesn't mean it the way it sounds." I found an entry from when she was a teenager and read her personal thoughts back to her, the suffering and uncertainty of a young person being continuously mistreated by her father. Did this feel like love when it was happening to you?" Her carefully constructed reality began crumbling around her. For the first time, I was seeing my mother not as an enemy who refused to protect us, but as another victim in Harold Brennan's elaborate web of lies. "He told me it was different with us," she whispered. "He said what happened to me was wrong because my father didn't explain it properly, didn't prepare me with patience and understanding. He promised he would do better with our girls." I reached across the table and took her shaking hands in mine. "Mom, there is no right way to rape a child. There is no loving way to abuse your daughter. He lied to you about everything." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of her weeping. Outside, wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the frozen landscape. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes held a clarity I hadn't seen in years. "What do we do now?" For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't facing it alone. The flame inside my chest roared to life, no longer just anger, but something more powerful: hope, tempered with unshakable determination. Harold Brennan's empire of lies was about to come crashing down, and this time he wouldn't be able to charm or manipulate his way out of the consequences. The next 3 weeks were a delicate balance between hope and terror, as Mom and I worked together to build an airtight case against Dad. But her years of psychological conditioning made her an unreliable ally. One day, she'd be strong and determined, ready to see justice done. The next, she'd backslide into doubt and panic. "Think about the scandal," she'd whisper during her weak moments, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold her fragile resolve together. "Think about what people will say when they find out. Your father has friends everywhere: at the bank, the courthouse, the police station. What if they don't believe us? What if they think we're just vindictive women trying to destroy a good man's reputation? I'd play the recordings again, show her the journal entries in her own handwriting, but the doubt would creep back in like morning fog. Harold Brennan's manipulation ran deeper than conscious thought, deeper than evidence, deeper than logic itself. The situation at home became a powder keg, waiting for a spark. Dad sensed that something fundamental had shifted. Mom's behavior was different, more guarded, and I'd grown bolder in my defiance. When he tried to corner Lily in the basement laundry room one afternoon, I confronted him directly for the first time in our lives. "Don't touch her." He turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation. In the dim basement light, surrounded by the familiar smells of detergent and old concrete, we faced each other like adversaries finally dropping their masks. "I beg your pardon. You heard me." My voice was steadier than I felt. "Keep your hands off my sister." We stared at each other in the shadows, the air thick with years of unspoken threats and carefully maintained lies. Dad's hands slowly clenched into fists at his sides. "I think you've forgotten who runs this household, young lady." "No," I said, stepping protectively in front of Lily. "I think you've forgotten that little girls grow up. And when they do, they remember everything." His backhanded slap sent me stumbling into the washing machine, the sharp edge catching my ribs. Stars exploded across my vision, and I tasted blood where my teeth cut my lip. But I didn't cry, didn't cower the way I would have 6 months ago. Instead, I straightened up and smiled. "Is that all you've got?" The rage in his eyes was terrifying, but also revelatory. For the first time, Harold Brennan looked genuinely rattled. His carefully maintained control was slipping, and we both knew it. That night, he came to my room with a violence I'd never experienced before. It was as if my defiance had stripped away the last pretense that this was about love or family tradition. This was punishment, pure and simple, a demonstration of who held the real power in our house. When it was over, I lay in the dark, cataloging my injuries with clinical detachment. Bruises on my ribs where he'd gripped me, scratches on my back from his fingernails, a split lip that would be difficult to explain at school. But I also had fresh evidence. The hidden recording device had captured it all: his explicit threats, his detailed descriptions of what he planned to do to Lily, his casual admission that he'd been breaking in young girls in our family for generations. The next morning, I couldn't hide the extent of my injuries from Mom. She found me in the bathroom trying to cover the bruises on my neck with makeup, my hands shaking too badly to apply it properly. "Oh my God, Emma, what did he do to you?" I showed her everything: the finger marks on my throat, the welts across my shoulders, played the recording from the previous night. For a moment, I thought this would be the final evidence she needed to push past her conditioning and act. Instead, she collapsed into full panic. "We can't do this," she sobbed, sinking onto the edge of the bathtub. "We can't destroy our family. Think about Lily. How will this affect her future? Think about your father's business, his reputation. We'll lose everything, Emma, our home, our place in this community, everything we've built." Her regression was devastating but predictable. The psychological chains Harold had forged over 2 decades were stronger than physical evidence, stronger than our pain, stronger than rational thought. "Mom, look at me." I knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet my eyes. "We've already lost everything that matters: our safety, our innocence, our ability to trust the person who should have protected us above all others. What's left to lose?" But even as I spoke, I could see her retreating behind the familiar walls of denial and rationalization that had kept her functioning for so long. Meanwhile, my friendship with Sarah was becoming both my lifeline and another source of stress. She'd been watching me carefully since our conversation, noting every new bruise, every flinch, when someone touched my shoulder unexpectedly. "This can't go on," she said one afternoon as we walked home from school together. "Emma, he's getting worse. Even I can see that." I pulled my coat tighter against the February wind, wishing I could hide from her perceptive gaze as easily as I hid from everyone else. "I'm handling it." "No, you're not. You're surviving it, which isn't the same thing." She stopped walking and grabbed my arm, forcing me to face her. "We have enough evidence now. The recordings, the physical signs. It's time to tell someone who can actually help." The weight of her certainty was both comforting and terrifying. "Sarah, you don't understand how complicated this is. It's not just him, it's my whole family, generations of this. And if we're wrong about how people will react, we're not wrong." Her voice was firm, with the kind of moral clarity that only comes from the outside looking in. "Emma, what he's doing is evil. Pure evil. And evil doesn't get better on its own, it just grows stronger." That evening, Mrs. Patterson called our house. I answered the phone, and her familiar voice carried a new note of professional concern. "Emma, I'd like you to come see me tomorrow during lunch period. There are some things we need to discuss." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of things?" "I think you know. Emma, several of your teachers have expressed concern about changes in your behavior and appearance. There are protocols we're required to follow when we suspect a student might be in danger." After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone, knowing that everything was about to change. Mrs. Patterson wasn't going to accept vague reassurances anymore. She was going to ask direct questions and expect honest answers. The flame inside me flickered between hope and terror. This could be our salvation, or it could be the catastrophe that destroyed what was left of our family. Either way, the time for secrets and half-truths was running out. That night, I made a decision that would change all our lives forever. Tomorrow, I would stop being afraid of the consequences and start being afraid of what would happen if I did nothing. Harold Brennan had spent years teaching us to fear the outside world more than we feared him. Tomorrow, I would prove him wrong. March 2nd, 1955. The date is carved into my memory like words on a gravestone. The day I finally found the courage to walk away from everything I'd ever known to save what mattered most. I woke before dawn with my stomach churning and my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The recording device sat on my nightstand next to Mom's journal and the photographs I'd taken of our injuries. Everything was packed in my school satchel, along with a detailed timeline I'd constructed of Dad's abuse patterns. The evidence that would either save us or destroy us completely. Dad had left early for a business meeting in Springfield, giving me the window I needed. Mom was still asleep after another crushing double shift, and Lily was curled in her bed around the new stuffed elephant. Tom had bought her a replacement for the rabbit that had mysteriously disappeared during one of Dad's rages. I dressed carefully in my navy blue skirt and white blouse clothes that would make me look respectable and believable. My hands trembled as I braided my hair, but my resolve felt solid as bedrock. There was no turning back now. The walk to school took 20 minutes through streets still wet with morning dew. Shop owners were raising their awnings and sweeping sidewalks. Mrs. Henderson waved from her garden where she was checking her early tulips. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like any other spring morning in small-town America. But inside my chest, revolution was brewing. I went straight to Mrs. Patterson's office, where she was reviewing files and sipping coffee from a mug that read, "World's Best Mom." When she looked up and saw my expression, she immediately set everything aside. "Emma, I'm glad you came. Please sit down." I remained standing, clutching my satchel like armor. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to report a crime. Actually, multiple crimes." Her eyebrows rose, but her voice stayed gentle. "What kind of crimes, honey?" "Physical abuse, violence, child harm." Each term struck the silence like a thunderclap. My father has been attacking me for months, and now he's targeting my 10-year-old sister. Mrs. Patterson's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor and sending brown liquid splashing across her sensible shoes. For a moment, she just stared at the mess, her face cycling through shocked grief and a deep professional anger that told me I'd been right to trust her. "Emma, those are very serious accusations. I need you to tell me everything, and then we're going to call the police." For the next hour, I laid out our nightmare in methodical detail. I played the recordings, showed her the photographs, read passages from Mom's journal that revealed the generational nature of the abuse. Mrs. Patterson listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more grim with each revelation. Emma, she said finally, I want you to understand what's going to happen next. I'm required by law to report this immediately. The police will come, they'll arrest your father, and you and Lily will be placed in protective custody while they investigate. The old fear rose up like a tide. Protective custody. Temporary foster care just until we can ensure your safety. There are good families, people trained to help children who've been through trauma. She leaned forward, her eyes kind but unflinching. I know it's frightening, but Emma, what you've described can't continue. Not for one more day. I thought of Lily's hollow eyes, her fading spirit, the way she'd started talking about wanting to disappear forever. I thought of the bruises we hid under long sleeves and the careful dance of survival we performed every single day. Do whatever you need to do, I said. Just please don't let him hurt her anymore. Mrs. Patterson reached across her desk and squeezed my hand. He won't. I promise you, Emma. He will never hurt either of you again. The next few hours blurred together like scenes from someone else's nightmare. Police officers arrived, their radios crackling with official codes that sounded like a foreign language. Detective Linda Rivera from the County Sheriff's Department took my statement while Mrs. Patterson sat beside me, her presence a steady anchor in the chaos. Emma, this recording is extremely compelling evidence, Detective Rivera said after listening to Dad's voice describe his crimes in graphic detail. Combined with the physical evidence and your sister's testimony, we have more than enough to make an arrest. But there was a complication I hadn't anticipated. We sent officers to your house to pick up your father. Detective Rivera continued, but he's not there. According to your mother, he called this morning to say his Springfield meeting was canceled and he'd decided to visit his brother in Chicago instead. He's not expected back until Sunday. My blood turned to ice. He knows. What do you mean? He knows something's wrong. Dad's brother died 3 years ago. I went to the funeral. He's running. Detective Rivera's expression hardened. Then we'll find him. Emma, I want you to understand something. Your father is not going to charm his way out of this. The evidence you've provided is overwhelming. When we catch him, and we will catch him, he's going to prison for a very long time. They brought Mom to the station that afternoon. She arrived in the back of a police car, her face swollen from crying, and her hair escaping from its usually perfect bun. When she saw me sitting in the interview room, her expression was a mixture of betrayal and relief so complex it was almost impossible to read. Why didn't you tell me you were going to do this? She whispered. I tried, Mom. For weeks I tried. But every time you found another reason to wait, another excuse to be afraid. I leaned forward, searching her face for any sign of the strength I'd seen glimpses of. Lily was disappearing day by day. I couldn't watch that happen anymore. They played Mom portions of the recordings, showed her the photographic evidence of our injuries. She listened with her hands pressed over her mouth, her face growing paler with each revelation. I didn't know it had gotten so bad, she said finally. I didn't know he was hurting you so much. Ah, yes, you did. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I couldn't take them back. Maybe you didn't want to know, maybe it was easier to believe his lies, but part of you always knew. She broke down, then sobbing with the kind of raw anguish that comes from watching 20 years of carefully constructed reality collapse in a single afternoon. I'm so sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry. I was supposed to protect you both, and I failed. I failed completely. Detective Rivera had been watching our interaction with professional interest. Mrs. Brennan, we're going to need your full cooperation if we want to make sure your husband faces justice for what he's done. Mom straightened in her chair, wiping her tears with a tissue that was already falling apart. What do you need me to do? Testify. Tell the court about your own history of abuse, how he manipulated you into accepting his behavior as normal. Help us establish the pattern. The request hung in the air between us. I could see Mom wrestling with decades of conditioning, the ingrained habit of protecting Harold at all costs, warring with her growing understanding of what he'd really done to our family. Finally, she nodded. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything." They found Dad 2 days later at a motel outside St. Louis, registered under a false name with a suitcase full of cash and what appeared to be detailed plans for starting over in Mexico. The arrest made headlines across 3 states. Prominent businessman arrested on child abuse charges. Insurance executive accused of generational sexual abuse. I watched the footage of him being led away in handcuffs on the evening news, his face shocked and pale, his usual confidence completely shattered. For a moment, I felt not triumph, but a strange emptiness, as if the fear that had defined my life for so long had left a vacuum behind. But as the camera panned across our house, now cordoned off with police tape, as investigators searched for additional evidence, I also felt something else stirring in my chest. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief that the nightmare was finally over. Harold James Brennan would never hurt another child. Never again would his shadow fall across a little girl's bedroom. Never again would his lies poison a family's love. The flame inside me had done its work. Now, it was time to learn what came after the fire, what grew in the ashes of a life rebuilt from scratch. The trial lasted 8 months and dominated the local newspapers in ways that made grocery shopping an ordeal and school attendance a daily exercise in ignoring whispers and stares. Harold Brennan hired Thomas Whitmore, an expensive defense attorney from Chicago, whose reputation was built on destroying the credibility of victims and their families. Whitmore's strategy became clear during opening statements: paint us as a dysfunctional family of liars seeking attention and money, with me cast as a manipulative teenager who'd seduced my own father and was now crying rape to cover my shame. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said during his opening statement, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "What we have here is not a case of child abuse, but rather a case of a troubled young woman who engaged in inappropriate behavior and is now attempting to destroy an innocent man's reputation to avoid taking responsibility for her actions." I sat in the witness box 3 days later, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking, and watched Whitmore approach with the confidence of a predator who'd never met prey that fought back. "Miss Brennan, isn't it true that you've always been jealous of the attention your father paid to your younger sister?" "No, sir." "Isn't it true that you've been reading romance novels and filling your head with inappropriate fantasies about older men?" "No, sir." "Isn't it the case that you initiated inappropriate contact with your father and are now making false accusations because you feel guilty about your actions?" The courtroom went dead silent. I looked across the gallery and saw Mom sitting in the front row, her face set with a determination I'd never seen before. Behind her sat Sarah and her parents, Mrs. Patterson and Detective Rivera. People who believed me. People who were fighting for Lily and me. "Sir," I said calmly, my voice clear in the quiet room. "I was 14 when this behavior started. Children cannot lead adults into wrong actions. Young people cannot give permission for inappropriate contact with their parents. What your client did to us was harmful and illegal, and blaming victims will not change that." Whitmore's face reddened, but before he could respond, the prosecutor objected, and the judge sustained it with a sharp warning about appropriate lines of questioning. The turning point came when they played the recordings in open court. Dad's voice filled the courtroom, describing in his own words what he'd done to us, his threats, his casual admission that this was a family tradition he'd learned from his own father. The jury listened with expressions ranging from disgust to horror, and I saw several people in the gallery, including Dad's former friends and business associates, get up and leave. Mom's testimony was perhaps the most devastating. She took the stand, wearing a simple blue dress, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and told the court about her own childhood trauma, with a clarity and strength that astonished everyone who knew her. "Harold convinced me that what my father did to me was love," she said, her voice never wavering despite the tears on her cheeks. He spent years rewriting my memories, making me believe that rape was affection and violation was intimacy. By the time I realized what he was doing to my daughters, I was so broken I couldn't even recognize abuse when I saw it. She looked directly at Dad for the first time since the trial began. But I can recognize it now. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure he can never hurt another child. Other victims came forward during the trial, women who'd been too afraid to speak before, but found courage in our example. Dad's sister testified about their childhood, revealing that the abuse in their family went back at least 4 generations. A former neighbor described suspicious behavior she'd witnessed, but had been too intimidated to report. The defense crumbled under the weight of evidence and testimony. Whitmore's attempts to discredit us fell flat when faced with medical evidence, audio recordings, and a pattern of behavior that stretched back decades. On October 23, 1955, Harold James Brennan was convicted on 17 counts, including rape, sexual assault of a minor, child abuse, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The judge sentenced him to 35 years in prison, effectively a life sentence for a man his age. Mr. Brennan. Judge Morrison said during sentencing, "Your crimes represent not just individual acts of violence, but a systematic pattern of predatory behavior that has destroyed multiple generations of your own family. You have violated the most sacred trust that exists between parent and child, and you have shown no remorse whatsoever for the devastation you've caused." During the reading of the sentence, Dad looked directly at me from the defendant's table. For a moment, I saw not the monster who'd terrorized our home, but a pathetic, broken man whose empire of lies had finally collapsed around him. I felt no satisfaction in his destruction, only a profound emptiness where fear had lived for so long. But as they led him away in shackles, I also felt the first stirring of something I'd almost forgotten: hope for a future where nightmares didn't define my sleep, and hypervigilance didn't color every waking moment. The community's reaction was mixed and often painful. Some people supported us, understanding that we were victims who'd shown incredible courage in coming forward. But others, particularly those who'd been close to Dad, treated us like we'd destroyed an innocent man's life for attention or revenge. Mrs. Kowalski cornered me at Murphy's General Store one day, her face twisted with anger. "That man gave so much to this community," she hissed. "How could you make up such terrible lies about him?" I looked her in the eye and said quietly, "The recordings are part of the public record now, Mrs. Kowalski. Listen to them yourself, then tell me they're lies." She stalked away without another word, but I saw her hands shaking as she grabbed her purse. We'd moved to a small apartment across town during the trial, far from the house on Elm Street, with its carefully maintained facade and hidden horrors. The 3-bedroom unit above Peterson's hardware store wasn't much, but it felt like a palace compared to the prison our old home had become. Lily struggled the most initially. The therapy sessions were difficult for her to understand, why she had to talk to strangers about things that hurt, why the safe silence we'd maintained for so long had been broken. She had nightmares most nights, waking up screaming for comfort that we were all still learning how to provide without fear. But slowly, gradually, I began to see glimpses of the little girl she'd been before Dad's abuse stole her innocence. She started humming again while she colored. She asked questions about normal things, why the sky was blue, whether we could get a kitten for the apartment if horses really could run as fast as cars. Mom was seeing Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a trauma specialist from the State University, who'd volunteered to help our family pro bono. The sessions were breaking down 20 years of carefully constructed lies, forcing Mom to confront not just what Dad had done to us, but what her own father had done to her decades earlier. I'm learning that I never really understood what healthy relationships look like, she told me one evening as we sat in our tiny living room. I thought pain and love were the same thing because that's all I'd ever known. As for me, I threw myself into my art with renewed passion. The sketches I'd made during the dark years, horses running wild faces twisted with hidden pain, gave way to new subjects. Children playing safely in sunlit yards. Families sharing genuine moments of joy. women standing strong and unafraid. I also began volunteering with the county's victim advocacy program, using my experience to help other children navigate the legal system. It wasn't easy work. Each case brought back memories I was still processing, but it felt important, necessary, like turning our suffering into something that could prevent other families from enduring the same nightmare. 3 years later, I stood in my cap and gown at Millbrook High School's graduation ceremony, scanning the crowd for the faces that mattered most. Mom sat in the third row, her pride evident despite the gray threads that had appeared in her hair since the trial. Beside her, Lily, now 13 and growing into a confident young woman, waved enthusiastically when our eyes met. Sarah was graduating too, of course, her red hair brilliant under her cap, as she accepted her diploma with characteristic enthusiasm. She'd been accepted to the state university with a scholarship in journalism, planning to write stories that gave voice to people who'd been silenced by trauma or injustice. I'd been accepted to the same university with a scholarship in art therapy, a field that combined my love of drawing with my desire to help other survivors heal. My advisor had already connected me with several programs that worked with children who'd experienced abuse, and I'd begun volunteering at a residential facility that provided art supplies and instruction to kids in foster care. After the ceremony, we gathered at Sarah's house for a celebration that felt both triumphant and bittersweet. 3 years had passed since Dad's conviction, but the work of healing was ongoing, probably lifelong. Still, we'd built something beautiful from the ashes of our old life. Mom had started dating Tom Peterson, whose family owned the hardware store where we rented our apartment. Tom was gentle and patient, understanding our family's history without trying to fix or replace anything. His approach to love was so different from what we'd known that it had taken months for any of us to trust. It was real. Lily had blossomed in ways that astonished everyone who knew our story. She played violin in the school orchestra, volunteered at the animal shelter, and spoke openly about her experiences in ways that helped other survivors feel less alone. The trauma would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her entire existence. The legal battles were finally completely over. Dad's appeals had all been denied, and he would spend the rest of his life in Menard Correctional Center. I'd stopped thinking about him daily, stopped jumping at unexpected sounds, or feeling panic when men raised their voices. The hypervigilance that had kept me alive during the worst years was gradually fading, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of safety. But the real surprise came the following week as I was cleaning out my childhood bedroom in preparation for college. Hidden behind my old bookshelf, I found a shoebox I'd forgotten about. Inside were letters, dozens of them forwarded from our old address on Elm Street. They were from other survivors, women who'd read about our case in the newspaper or heard about it through victim advocacy networks, had written to thank us for our courage in coming forward. Some shared their own stories of abuse and recovery. Others simply wanted us to know that our willingness to speak truth in the face of overwhelming pressure had helped them find their own voices. One letter particularly moved me. It was from a woman named Janet, whose father had been part of the same kind of generational abuse pattern that had trapped our family. "Your daughter didn't just save herself and her sister," Janet had written to Mom. "She saved children who haven't even been born yet. The courage to speak truth when everyone around you is demanding silence is one of the rarest gifts a person can give to the world." Because of Emma's bravery, I found the strength to report my own father breaking a cycle of abuse that had continued in our family for 5 generations. As I sat reading these letters in the afternoon sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, I realized something profound had happened over the past 3 years. Our trauma, which had once felt like a life sentence, had become a source of strength, not just for us, but for countless other survivors who needed to know that healing was possible. That evening, the 3 of us sat on Tom's back porch, watching Lily teach the neighbors' children how to identify constellations. Her laughter carried across the yard, bright and uninhibited, the sound of a young woman who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim space in the world. "Do you ever regret it?" Mom asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the summer crickets. "Going to the police that day, all the pain that came after, I considered the question seriously. The years of therapy, the brutal legal battle, the social ostracism, the slow, difficult work of rebuilding our sense of safety and trust, none of it had been easy. No, I said, finally. I regret that we had to go through any of it. I regret that Dad was the kind of man who could hurt children. I regret that it took so long for us to get help, and that Mom had to suffer through her own childhood trauma without anyone to protect her. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw not the enemy who'd initially refused to believe us, but another survivor who'd found the strength to break free from decades of conditioning. But reporting him breaking the silence, fighting back, that's the one thing I'll never regret. As if summoned by our conversation, Lily jogged over to the porch, her face flushed with exercise and genuine happiness. Emma, will you help me with my high school application essays next week? I want to write about how art therapy helped me heal, but I'm not sure where to start. I smiled and pulled her down beside me on the porch swing. Of course, we'll work on them together. She nestled against my side the way she had as a little girl. But now, there was no fear in the gesture, no hyper-awareness of who might be watching or what consequences might follow. It was simply the comfortable affection between sisters who'd survived something terrible together and emerged stronger on the other side. Later that night, alone in my childhood bedroom that held no traumatic memories, I opened my current journal, not the hidden record of abuse I'd once kept, but a new one filled with hopes, dreams, and plans for the future. On the last page I wrote, "We thought breaking the silence would destroy our family. Instead, it saved us. We thought telling the truth would make us victims forever. Instead, it made us survivors. We thought we were weak for needing help. Instead, we discovered that asking for help is one of the bravest things a person can do." The little girls who lived in fear on Elm Street are gone. In their place are strong women who refuse to be defined by what was done to them. We are living proof that healing is possible, that justice exists, and that love, real love, not the twisted version our father taught us, can overcome even the darkest trauma. Well, this is our story. This is our victory, and this is just the beginning. Outside my window, the summer night was peaceful and safe. In the distance, I could hear the train whistle that had once sounded like loneliness, but now reminded me of journeys, yet to take adventures, yet to have a whole world of possibilities opening up before us. For the first time in my life, I fell asleep without checking the lock on my door, without listening for footsteps in the hallway, without fear of what tomorrow might bring. We were free. We were safe. We were home. And in the morning, we would begin building the rest of our lives